Hello, and welcome to section 7.5 about the human nervous system. First, I'd just like you to think a little bit about when you talk on the phone, how you're able to communicate with someone who is not right there beside you, and that's due to the electrical impulses that are traveling and enable you to talk on the phone to someone who's not right there. Well, in a similar way, the nervous system also does this. It uses electrical impulses that travel through your body, and it allows some parts of the body to communicate with other parts. And that's pretty much what the human nervous system is. And the basis of the nervous system is what we call a neuron. Neurons are the basic units. They are cells. They're very long cells. And here's a picture of one of these neurons, one of these cells. And it has three regions. There's the cell body right here. There's a nucleus. And then there are dendrites. Here are the dendrites. They are branch-like extensions off of the body. They receive impulses and carry them toward the cell body. Then there is a third portion that makes up the neuron called the axon. Here is the axon and the ending of it. The axon is an extension of the neuron that carries impulses away from the cell body and toward other neurons, muscles, or glands. And one way that I think is very easy to remember, axon, is that axons carry impulses away. They both start with the letter A. Axons carry impulses away. Dendrites bring them toward the cell body. So now let's look at this idea of synapses. You've probably heard of synapses in your brain, and what are they? Well, neurons, the cells that we're talking about, they lie end to end and they do not actually touch each other. The junction in between the neurons is called a synapse. Across the synapse, neurotransmitters will diffuse. Neurotransmitters is a long word for the type of chemicals that diffuse across that synapse. They go from the axon of one neuron to the dendrites of the next neuron. And this picture shows this idea, however, it appears that they're actually touching. They don't actually touch. There is a space in there. That synapse is the space. And across that space, the gap is basically bridged by these neurotransmitters or chemicals. They diffuse across the synapse to the next neuron. So how is an impulse actually transmitted through a neuron? Here's just a tiny reprint of that picture of a neuron, so you have that in your mind. This right here represents a portion of this axon. And this is a diagram showing a very detailed picture of the mechanisms involved in transmitting a signal across the axon. We have what are called gated ions. And across, right here across that potential, we have a gated ion being represented. This right here represents this axon right here. And ions, if you'll remember, are just charged particles, okay? These are sodium ions. Na is the chemical symbol for sodium. And these sodium ions, they're charged, they're positive. They cannot go through the cell membrane here. And when this gated ion is closed, when that channel is closed, it's gated, these sodium ions cannot go through it. So when it's open, the sodium ions then can travel through it. You remember we discussed the facilitated diffusion before, and that's really what's going on with these gated ion channels. And these gated ion channels are located all along that axon. And when they are closed, right here is showing that they are closed, there is a potential an electrical potential that is built up. Here you can see positive ions on the outside, we have negative ions on the inside, and because these channels are all closed, it maintains that electrical potential. What happens then when these gates open? Well, when they open, obviously, there are all kinds of ions that are going different places, and we have the propagation of an impulse that travels down that axon as the different ions travel in and out of the axon. An electrical impulse is generated and it travels down that axon. Now let's look a little bit more, step back, and look at the overall nervous system. There are two parts to the nervous system. There's a central nervous system and a peripheral nervous system. We're going to look at the central nervous system first. So if we step back and look at the whole human brain, we have the cerebrum, it's the big part here. Then there's the cerebellum, located right under there, and the medulla oblongata. It's part of the brainstem. And let's look at what each of these things do. The cerebrum, a very large part, is divided into two halves or two hemispheres, the right and the left, and they are connected by bundles of nerves. The cerebrum controls conscious activities, your intelligence, your memory, language, skeletal muscle movements, your senses. The cerebrum, on the other hand, under here is located at the back of the brain. It controls balance, posture, and coordination. The medulla oblongata, part of the brainstem, it controls involuntary activities like your breathing and your heart rate. Now let's take a look at the peripheral nervous system. That includes all of the nerves that carry messages to and from the central nervous system. So from the central nervous system, we have many nerves that go all throughout the entire body. And let's just look quickly at an overview of how that impulse is transmitted from an overview standpoint. Sensory receptors receive stimulus. For example, if somebody taps you on the shoulder, there's a stimulus. That stimulus is received through sensory receptors on the skin. Those transmit that touch message to the brain. The brain interprets the message and sends a response to motor neurons, and those motor neurons transmit the response back to muscles, which are activated and cause a movement. Maybe you'll turn your head to see who tapped you on the shoulder. If we look at the peripheral nervous system, all these different muscles that are connected, there are two types of systems at work: somatic and autonomic. Not automatic, but autonomic. And let's look at those a little more in detail. What is the somatic nervous system? It's the part of the peripheral nervous system that is voluntary. It contains 12 pairs of cranial nerves, 31 pairs of spinal nerves from the spinal cord, and all of the branches that are involved. The nerves are not bindles, but bundles of neuron axons bound together by connective tissues, and the cell bodies are found in clusters all along the spinal column. These nerves relay information between the central nervous system and skeletal muscles. It's the voluntary response, what you choose, what you are consciously in control of doing. Reflex is something, a word that we throw around a lot. It is, the reflex impulse travels directly to the spinal column or the brainstem, where an impulse is sent back to a muscle. So it's part of the somatic nervous system, the reflex, but it is, when a reflex occurs, the impulse is not sent to the brain and then back to be interpreted. Your brain actually finds out about it later. But it is when that impulse goes directly to the spinal column and then back to a muscle. It's still part of the somatic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, however, those carry impulses from the central nervous system to internal organs. These are involuntary responses. They are not under your conscious control, and there are two different types. There's the sympathetic autonomic nervous system, and the parasympathetic. Sympathetic controls internal functions during time of stress. When extremely stressful situations happen, the sympathetic nervous system takes over for the most part. The parasympathetic nervous system controls these internal functions when the body is at rest and not under extreme duress. So some advanced ideas for you. Investigate the pathway of a reflex with more specific details. It definitely, you can look into any of this information in even greater detail than we've talked about here. Find out what hormones are involved in pathways of the sympathetic nervous system. Research more specific mechanisms involved in synapses. What are the chemical effects of drugs on the nervous system? That's a very interesting topic. So I look forward to seeing what you come up with, and I'll see you in class.